What we see a lot is so many aspiring writers, and this applies to both people who are trying to break into screenwriting and also into writing a novel, is they spend a lot of time mastering the craft. And by mastering the craft, I mean the actual writing style, the form of expression, right? The unique form of expression that is required for, if you're going to be a novelist and you want to write those kind of prose, whether you write in first person or third person, just really learning and mastering just the craft itself of writing. And then with screenwriting, there's the unique formatting, beyond just learning the formatting, but learning how to write tight, focused action lines, expressive action lines, to write solid, meaningful, deep, relevant dialogue. This is all part of learning the craft of writing. But what writers, I think, fail to understand is that they conflate this craft of writing with the craft of storytelling, because they're not the same thing. And what happens is, and this is where writers truly struggle, the majority of writers who really put in the time and the energy to try to break into either the craft of novel writing or the craft of screenwriting, they put all that time and energy into the craft of writing itself, and they don't put in the time to truly understand the craft of storytelling. And what they learn about storytelling is usually very flat, two-dimensional ideas, which is why they end up with flat, two-dimensional stories. You see, what ends up happening is that most writers, whether you're learning screenwriting or you're learning novel writing, you end up thinking about stories in a very linear fashion with some kind of timeline that looks like this. And there are many different variations. This is based on this traditional standard 3-act structure, which has an act 1 and act 2 with 2 halves of the second act, and then an act 3. And then there are many different variations. There are individuals who will call this 4-act structure 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then there's 6 acts and there's 12 acts. And ultimately what's still happening, no matter which variation of this image you're looking at, ultimately what is happening is you're forced into a way of thinking very flat, two-dimensionally about your stories. This line is actually tremendously inaccurate in describing what we find is happening in the best movies and in the best novels. This is not what the great stories look like. So what ends up happening is that you have spent so much time working on the craft of writing, mastering the craft of writing, and you have not taken the time to really understand the craft of storytelling. And even what you've learned about storytelling looks like this. And you end up with these ideas that are very shallow. To be honest, they're very shallow. They're very two-dimensional, which is why the material you produce is shallow and two-dimensional. You end up with ideas of the inciting incident, plot points, the midpoint, and just sort of this timeline of events. But this is inaccurate. Or perhaps you have come across Joseph Campbell's work and his monomyth approach to storytelling. Now, this monomyth it's very inspirational. It definitely lets the creative juices start flowing. But this is not useful at all to writing a great story. Just like, for instance, one flaw is the idea that he talks about returning with the elixir. Right? The hero goes on the journey and eventually returns back to where they came from. But we see this is a very rare. In great stories, that's not the case at all. In Star Wars, Luke Skywalker never goes back. He never goes back to his old home. And we see this in time and time again, that the main character in all the great stories do not actually return with an elixir. And this is not very useful in understanding really what needs to happen in good storytelling. Once again, even though it's in a circular motion, it's flat and two-dimensional, but it's in many ways not even very useful. Okay, the call to adventure and refusal of the call, those are relatively clear, but they need much more deeper explanation. Where does the call come from? What is this idea of the refusal of the call in the first place? Then you're going to get ideas like belly of the whale, meeting with the goddess, the ultimate boon. Like, what in the world is the ultimate boon? Magic flight, master of two worlds. This is not useful at all. And again, most writers, what happens is they spend all that time working on the craft of writing, mastering the craft of writing. And then when they go to learn storytelling, how they're going to use that craft that they've taken so much time to learn, how they're going to, then they use either an image, some form of an image that looks like this or something that looks like this. And the better way to think about your stories is what we teach here at Your Storytelling Potential. And it looks a lot more like this. And right away you'll notice this is a much more complex way of thinking about story. And I always tell individuals and writers who fall into my circle, into my courses, or take my book, I don't teach, first of all, I do not teach writing. So again, there's that craft of writing. I don't teach the craft of writing. I don't teach the craft of how to write a better screenplay, or how to format a screenplay, or how to write a better novel, and how to use first person or third person. I don't teach any of that. I'm not even a master at that myself. What I teach is how to think about stories. I teach the other half. The other half is the part of the storytelling. I help writers who have mastered the craft of writing to help them master the craft of storytelling. And I tell writers that what I teach is not necessarily more simple, but it's more accurate in terms of what is happening in the truly great stories that get produced, that get recognized, that win Academy Awards, and the novels that get selected and made into movies. The most successful stories have a pattern that looks much more like this. And what we see in this image is that there are two major realities that flow into the now of the story you are telling. There is what we call an A story, or proximate cause, and proximate cause character that flows into, this is the story you're telling. So all that work that you've taken and time to learn how to write great prose, those screenplays are describing what's happening between these two lines. That's what a screenplay describes, what happens here to here. That's what a great novel describes, what happens here to here. But there are at least two major realities that flow from before here into now. This is how you tell great stories. Because the A story flows, what we call the proximate cause, flows into now. Imagine in Armageddon, there's a giant asteroid, a meteorite, headed towards Earth. It's out here flowing towards Earth, and now it's about to hit Earth. That's the A story, the now. And then there is the main character, and the main character's reality that's also flowing from the past into the now. And then when the story's over, it's going to flow beyond the now. There's going to be what we call the revealed potential. Not a return with the elixir. That's not what we talk about. That's not accurate. Luke Skywalker never returns. He might gain something. He might grab a reality and understand the Force and understand his abilities. That's revealed potential. It was there all along. Luke Skywalker always had the potential to be a Jedi, to be great at the Force, to be the chosen one. He didn't know it. Not that he returns with an elixir, that his potential is revealed. That's what a great story does, and it doesn't matter whether we're talking about a hero like Luke Skywalker or the roughnecks in Armageddon, right? In Armageddon, you've got a bunch of roughnecks, oil riggers, not so great guys, difficult people who go and save the world. Their reality, their revealed potential is what their real abilities and capabilities are. And everyone in the A story doubts them, by the way. No one at NASA, no one in the government thinks this group of, if you go watch Armageddon, that's the thematic idea at play, by the way. This group of roughnecks are not good enough to save the world, yet they do it, and that's the revealed potential. Now, what we do is we see in great stories, again, we're not talking about how you write. We're not conflating the writing craft, the craft of writing with the craft of storytelling. Now what we're talking about is storytelling. Understand the craft of writing takes place between these two lines. Storytelling expands beyond these two lines. Storytelling is understanding that there's an A story that flows from the past into now, and there's a B story that flows from the past into now. And in the now looks like this. This image is actually the better way to think about structure, because all of structure is actually predicated on this. You actually have Act 1, then Act 2. Act 2 always has two parts. I teach this in my course, in my book. We do say that there's normally 3 primary acts, not 4 acts and not 6 acts and not 12 acts. 3 major acts. There's an Act 1, which is an introduction, and Act 2, which has 2 parts, and then the climatic act of Act 3. And we see that there are 2 stories that flow into the now. This is the now. This is what your craft of writing actually describes. And these two storylines are interacting, colliding with each other. That's what a great story is. A great story is the collision of two storylines into each other, the convergence. This is what a great story looks like in the now. And then we understand further that each storyline has its own complexity and depth. Not a simple line. No, the A story has its own rich, relevant, deeply rooted subplots. The B story, the main character's ongoing reality that exists before the story starts, has its own rich, deep, complex, thematically based subplots. And all that flows into the now. This is how you take the skills of being the craft of writing you've worked so hard on, is to understand now how to tell a great story with those writing skills. And then what we do is we understand better the actual progression of a story. We understand storytelling at a much deeper level, understanding how Act 1 flows, understanding how Act 2 flows, understanding how Act 3 flows. And then we understand the complexity in great stories. This is Act 1. This is Act 2. This is Act 3. We understand, by the way, the midpoint failure that happens both in the A story and in the B story is an essential moment. If you want to tell a great story, you need to understand what happens at the midpoint, how it's a failure. No matter what happens at the midpoint, it never works. This is the idea of the false victory. You've probably heard the midpoint's a false victory. And it oftentimes is a false victory, but it's a victory that is a failure anyway. That's the idea of the false victory. It's always a failure at the midpoint. And how Act 3 ultimately leads to the revealed potential, the transformation of your main character, and the resolution of whatever is taking place. Now, the way we break out of the mindset and the limited mindset of storytelling and this one-dimensional, going back to this image, the first step to thinking outside the box. This is a very limiting box. And when you put yourself in this way of thinking about stories, you don't realize to the degree to which you've put yourself into a very limiting, very poorly thought out box about the storytelling of your writing. Because what is happening is you've worked so hard to become a great writer, the craft of writing, and then you've been given horrific, horrible information about the craft of storytelling. So we do here with my system, Your Storytelling Potential, obviously my book, and my software called Plot Control, is we take you out of that limited point of view and we bring you up to the 30,000-foot view. And what we allow you to do, and what we teach you to do, is to think about what we call the 12 core elements of storytelling. Now, again, what we see here is over here, there's an A story. Again, this A story corresponds, let me just go back to this. This A story corresponds to this. These events that are taking place that are usually not related, certainly not directly related to the main character. This is the equivalent of the asteroid that is about to crash into Earth. That is the A story. But then the movie doesn't end, or story doesn't end with that. It doesn't matter if you're writing a novel or a screenplay. There's also a B story. There's an ongoing reality that is connected to the main character. And usually there's a problem or opportunity. There's some kind of circumstance or situation that is also erupting within the reality of the main character. And there's a character aligned with that we call the underlying cause. And the underlying cause character. And then there's a proximate cause and proximate cause character. That goes with the A story. And then you've got your main character. And what we do is we think much more dynamically about what is needed to tell a great story. And these core elements allow you to think about all the what's of your story, all the what needs to happen, and the who are the characters. Who is the main character? Who is the proximate cause character? Who is the underlying cause character? What is the thematic depth, the deeply rooted whys of all the characters and all the situations taking place? And we don't get stuck. Again, I'm going to go all the way back. We don't get stuck thinking about a timeline. We don't think about, well, what's the inciting incident? I'll tell you what an inciting incident is. Inciting incident is simply the A story coming into the now and the B story coming to the now, and they converge. That where they converge, the point at which they meet, that's your inciting incident. To have a meaningful inciting incident, you need to have a meaningful A story and a meaningful B story. Not that there's some problem or opportunity happening in the B story. That's not the inciting incident. That's part of the ongoing reality that makes the B story interesting. Not that there's some new problem opportunity, there's an asteroid. Of course there's an asteroid in the A story, but that's also not enough. There has to be both, and they converge, and that's your inciting incident. And then they move forward together. And you get your plot points, your midpoint, your climaxes and resolutions. But what this is all the whats. This is all the whys. This is all the whos. And once you know the whats, the whys, and the whos, then you figure out when. Then you take that information, you build your structure. This is how you can build and construct great stories. And then you can use those skills, the craft, the writing craft that you've worked so hard on to express something really wonderful and incredible and deeply relevant and meaningful. And it's a great story because you need to take the craft of writing and the craft of storytelling and merge them together. Just like you need to take an A story and a B story, right? There's an A story, the craft of writing, and a B story, the ability to tell great stories and understand storytelling. And then there's you, the writer, and you pull that all together. And that's what my book, Your Storytelling Potential, shows you how to do. And I have a course also called Your Storytelling Potential. And my software literally guides you step by step through this incredible process so that you can write better, deeper, more relevant, more incredible, meaningful stories with the craft of writing you've worked so hard to develop.